Welcome to the Pantheon Plus Rewind.
Hello and welcome, adventurers, to the Pantheon Plus Rewind, the weekly podcast that brings you a collection of content for both Pantheon Rise of the Fallen and the community surrounding it. This week, we're following up on some fragments to mull over some milestones, pondering the persistence of Pantheon, musing at our mailbox, and finally, ending the episode as we lean into the lore of an interesting individual. I hope this episode finds you well, and I'm so glad you've chosen to join me, Desrin, and my currently Canadian co-host, Theric, as we look onward and upward, and beyond, in this week's Rewind. Oh, how's it going, Theric?
Well, I'm curious as to why I'm currently Canadian. I mean, I know that I have some connection to the U.S. Maybe that's what you're referencing.
Yeah, I'm referencing your Chicago-ness as well as Canadianness.
Yeah, so for our listeners who don't know, because I talk about Canada all the time, I was actually born in the States, so I actually have dual citizenship, which is kind of cool. But I've lived in Canada since I was 12, so currently and probably permanently Canadian as far as I'm concerned. But
perfect.
Yeah, no, I'm doing really well. I'm doing really well. It's been a good week. Lots of interesting stuff going on. We had lots of fun times this week. I want to mention before we get going today, I had a cool thing that I discovered, and that's a new book that I'm reading, and I think it would be interesting to our listeners, so I actually earmarked it to mention it today. It's called Press Reset, and it's by Jason Schreier, who's like sort of an inside...
Yeah, I know Jason Schreier, like
insider, well-known journalist in the games industry. He has a previous book called Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, which was really, really good. And if you're not familiar with it, it's basically like what went right and what went wrong with some AAA titles that were being developed. This is a few years back. And I'm not sure how old Press Reset is, the one I'm reading right now, but it's basically like along the same lines. It's very, very interesting. And if you're interested in like the games industry and like big business and how games are made and what can go right and wrong, it's a really good read. So I'm about like a third of the way through it at this point, but very much recommend to anybody who's interested in that kind of thing. So yeah, that's what I've been doing.
That sounds great. Right up my alley, man. I might have to look into that.
Yeah, you should check it out.
As soon as I finish Crowsinger's series.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I got to get started on that too. I've actually imported it into my ebook reader and stuff. I've got it, and she's got a nice cover on it, so I got to get started on that too.
Yeah, man. Well, you know what else we need to get started on? Announcing our adventuring party.
Yes, I agree.
So let me get into that. We've got Ziplocks on the Darkmer Rogue, Sparrow on the Elf Ranger, Bounty Code on the Human Wizard, Screech on the Scar Bard, Wiki Woo on the Human Enchanter, Shuriken on the Dwarf Cleric, Horsosaurus on the Human Warrior, Daimlos on the Darkmer Cleric, and Jason on the Scar Beard Lord. As always, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on this kind of crazy adventure. And if you'd like to help out and join the adventuring party as well, feel free to drop a super chat donation during the YouTube premiere or check out our Patreon if you want to help us out but can't make the Sunday. I think as we go on, we're always just going to appreciate everything that you all do for Pantheon Plus and just generally in the community being so involved just on the whole. And it really pushes us, to keep going and not even just like the adventuring party stuff, but just seeing everyone being active and it makes our day. So thanks again.
It really does. I mean, every time I think after the show, every week after the premiere, I always message you on Discord, like, we had 40 people. We had 45 people today. Like, we're very like, not numbers driven, but just seeing that is so cool.
It's just encouraging. Yeah. It's so encouraging to see that people for some reason want to want
to hang out with us for an hour. I mean, heck, that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, with the intro out of the way, I think it's time we get to the show.
This week in Visionary Realms News and Notes. All right, well, it's the last week of the month, and that's always a little dry on the news side of things with Pantheon and VR, but never fear, we are here to dig up whatever news might slip under your radar or even ours, but we try to find it. So This week, we haven't really talked too much about one of VR's newest sort of additions to their media library, I guess if you want to call it that. But it's the Fragments of Terminus series, which they started doing, I don't know, a couple months ago, maybe a little more than that, since Minus came on board. I know one of the things he wanted to incorporate was much more, bite-sized, digestible types of media, right? So yeah, the way VR describes these, if you're not familiar with them, is they're short video clips that highlight important quotes, news, or details which originate from live streams, developer roundtables, or any other forms of their communication about their development. So this week, we got one called Level 10 Milestones, and it's specifically talking about what they said about the monk in the last newsletter. So Desrin, you get a super gold star on this one, man, because you brought this up on the show last week when we were talking about the monk in the newsletter. You said, how the monk gets access to the first of their 5 chakra gates at level 10. And then we talked about it, not at length because we were already, sort of running long and we had a lot of other stuff going on. So I don't feel like we did it justice. So I wanted to circle back to that and talk about this week since they were highlighting it as well. You correctly noted, what a big deal these milestone abilities are. And it opens up a discussion about, what other classes might get at level 10. What are some of the big abilities that you would consider a milestone? So, VR wanted to know about this too, and that's what Minus finished the video with, was sort of asking, what are you excited about as your class? What milestone abilities would you be interested in? Would you feel are appropriate at level 10 or something you'd be looking forward to?
Yeah.
So let's take a look at a couple of comments from that Fragments of Terminus video and see what people had to say about just the approach in general to this kind of class design mentality. And then we'll have some fun, speculating on, what we think would be the correct milestone abilities for each of the Pantheon classes. So again, Desert, I'm kind of riffing on your idea here last week about speculating what flex roles might exist.
It's kind of fun.
Because we had so much fun with it.
Yeah, it's kind of fun.
Yeah. It is kind of fun, totally. So let's get a couple general comments first about the whole milestone philosophy. Our friend LaFale had this to say about the concept of ability milestones. They said, I'm a fan of milestone levels. I don't need carrots every level, but significant growth points is definitely something I look forward to. So that's, and I think that carrot on a stick is really one of the fundamental aspects of this. And to follow that up, Joshua Anderson made a good point here. We're talking about, those carrots are really important, but when do we know them? Should we know them before we make our character, or should we learn of them as we go along? Here's what Joshua said. I can't wait till we get more of these. And honestly, I'm having a hard time pinpointing a favorite class because I don't have the most recent vision of the classes. I have an idea of what they're going to do, but if I want to make a class that has an easy time traveling, for instance, do I make a druid for the teleportation abilities, or do I make a wizard for their teleportation abilities? Am I going to spend 90% of their career without these abilities? Therefore, and then goes on to give a couple more examples sort of in that vein. So I thought that was a really important point too, when thinking about your planning long-term for your character, how do these milestone abilities sort of factor into that? How much do they factor into it? And how do you make that sort of decision? So let's get into each class and talk about the first one. Another comment was from Jessica in the comment on the YouTube video. And they said they're also excited about it, and they recalled getting Repent at level 50 on their EverQuest 2 Templar being a very big deal. So Desrin, let's start with the Cleric, because I think that is, the closest maybe to the EverQuest 2 Templar. Maybe you can correct me on that. Do you remember the Repent ability? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't, because I wasn't a Cleric main. I actually didn't play Cleric very much at all, except for an alt Inquisitor. So the specific one, not so much, but I mean, there were definitely milestone abilities in EQ2, and especially after Desert of Flames, because they put in kind of these extra special ones.
Nice.
Yeah, and so I'm definitely with the concept, but if we're talking about the Cleric, and we should probably preface, we're going to have to stay within the confines of what's on the website currently, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, who knows? And as was pointed out above, actually, they probably need to update those.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because as I was doing this, I sort of messaged you earlier in the week. I'm like, okay, pick one, and then we'll just sort of each pick one, milestone ability at level 10. And I'm reading the website. I'm like, man, there's some crazy stuff here.
Yeah.
There really is some crazy stuff here.
Yeah, and there are some that are like, okay, I could see that being like a way later ability.
Yeah.
Or whatever. But even like the wizard page is the one that really stood out to me. It's like it's not updated with the latest wizard info, and so like a lot of the abilities don't make sense because it's anyway, so we're gonna start with the cleric, right? So
so what do you think would be a good level 10 milestone ability for the cleric in Pantheon?
So my brain first went to revive, but then I'm like, I kind of feel like that should just be like an all healer thing. And so it's really not specific enough to the cleric. And I feel like the milestone ability should be really class defining, right? And the other, the other thing, just, I know I'm like delaying here, but, most classes have like their class specific resource, right? I'm also kind of assuming that like the chakra gates are unlocked. Either the class resource is unlocked or something like that at a particular point. So I'm going to kind of disregard the whole class resource thing when we're talking about this, because either it happens at level 10 or, whenever that happens, I feel like it should be, probably pretty standard across the different classes, right?
Yeah, I would think so. I would think that, the 1 to 10, they've said it. The 1 to 10 is supposed to be you learning your basics, your fundamentals. Right. And I feel like at 10 is when that would make sense to open up that class specific resource, and you have to start figuring out how to utilize that resource effectively. So you picked a res. I mean, the sort of signature cleric ability as the level 10 ability.
I mean, that was my first thought, but then I'm like, okay, that's not specific enough for a cleric. And I'm going to start an ongoing theme here of being unable to decide one thing, and because I feel like it shouldn't,
cheating, basically, is what you're saying.
maybe a little bit. It's just I feel like level 10, the milestone level, it doesn't have to mean just one ability. I think like it can't just be like one big ability and then a bunch of little ones. I think I see a milestone as being like a kind of turning point where you're like, okay, I have more of what this class is defined as. And so the two things that I picked are Coalescence and Reckon Stronghold. Coalescence is the you match your health with an ally, and Reckon Stronghold is a ward, a kind of damage prevention. And the reason I picked those is because I feel like those clearly define how the cleric heals. And I think that's what's kind of important to differentiate them starting at level 10 is how they heal. The only other thing I could think of was potentially abolish undeath, but then that's also kind of shared, I feel, with the paladin.
And pretty specific to the undead, right?
Yeah.
Like very limited not limited application, but limited application.
Yeah, so I feel like that might not be appropriate, but I'm like, at level 10, you should probably be like defined in how you do your main job, right?
Hey, yeah, well, totally. I think the Reckon Shield, that's the one where it like grants immunity for an amount of time, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I looked at that one too, and I was tempted by that one. I didn't pick any of the ones you picked, actually. The one that I picked. Now, I'm going to say res is a good choice because having played Project Gorgon, they don't give you a res for like a million levels.
35 or something.
It's so essential. You got to give a res to your healers in the early levels at some point. Absolutely essential. But I picked Celestial Aegis, and I'll read you what the description is. Yeah, because this is the coolest ability
ever. I know
ever.
It's cool.
So it says manifest the Celestial Aegis to place nearby. While it lasts, it's an immovable object that enemies must break down to pass through. I think that is fantastic. And again, we're going to repeat ourselves a few times here, but how they're going to do this, I don't know, because it seems like kind of a wild ability to try and program into the game, but whatever, it's there. This is a pretty defining thing because it makes your healing, it gives you more time to heal. So it like, up to this point, you're maybe, you've done some small healing, you're trying to do this, you're trying to do that. Now at 10, things get real. You can put some barriers down to give yourself a little more healing time, to try and, a little bit of crowd control actually. And flows into what we were saying last week about maybe a flex role for the cleric in doing a little more crowd control with this ability. But I thought that was pretty cool, so that was my choice.
I mean, that it is a really cool ability, no doubt. I think my only pushback would be I feel like that's a little too epic. It's a little.
It is pretty epic.
I think it's also a little too specific, which is why I didn't choose it. I felt like at level 10, what is the use case? And maybe it does exist though. Maybe that is a thing that'll be really helpful. So yeah, really good thoughts.
Okay. So let's move on. We could spend a whole lot of time on each one of these.
Sorry.
We got to keep it moving. Let's go with Warrior, because our friend Grogu gave his thoughts on the Warrior class in the comments. Grogu said, "I hope Warriors get battering ram at level 10 pretty early on. Leverage your." So he goes on to read what the ability is. It says, "Leverage your immense strength to break through certain barriers in the environment that have grown weak and unstable. If used against an enemy, battering ram will deal physical damage and knock the enemy to the ground." And Grogu goes on to say, like, and that early dungeon, that makes full use of these class specific abilities. So he wants to see, like, making sure the environments are designed to do things like this. He cites, the rogue rope ability, the druid's bridge ability, and just really leaning into the specific identity of the classes in these ones, and feeling like battering ram is a good example of that. So that's a pretty good choice, and I can see that. It's one that we've sort of commented on quite a few times. I went with a different one. I went with Will to Live. And the way Warrior, the ability is described is embrace your will to live, greatly increasing your dodge and parry chance, granting a bonus to healing effects cast on you, and locking your resilience to full, only usable when your health is below a certain threshold. So I think the really cool idea there is that it locks your resilience in at full. And resilience is that class-specific resource we were mentioning a few moments ago. So I just think this is a really overall, just a nice boost for the warrior class to get this. Again, maybe I just picked the epic abilities because they look the best, but I'd like to see this at level 10. I think warriors at level 10 would become really, really impressive with this kind of ability. What about you? What was your pick?
I think it's too epic. I think it's too and it's too specific to group play. I think because you're wanting to increase healing received, right? And at level 10, even though I'm a huge proponent of low level dungeons, I feel like it's a little too group based. To like, I would rather a different ability that uses the resource be involved, or something else, because I was tossed up between battle formations and banners.
Yeah. Battle formations is pretty sweet, I have to admit. But that's very group based, right?
Well, it is, but it's just a temp buff, right? That happens to affect the group as well. And so I did go with battle formations, specifically the conquest one, if we're going off of what's on the website, because what it does is it gives you additional haste as the mob's fleeing. And if you're level 10, you're starting to deal with that mechanic a lot, and getting a solution to that, whether you're solo or in a group, I feel like is really a big deal. And it already, puts you in the mode of using battle formations in a very simplified way. You use it when the mob is about to run away.
That's a good point. I mean, dealing with fleeing mobs is something that you're going to need to learn how to do pretty early on, right? So also, it would be a good teaching moment or teaching mechanic to put that one as a level 10 milestone. So I like that choice. Let's talk about the rogue. And I'll let you go first on this one. What did you think for level 10 rogue? What should get as a milestone?
So this was tough because, again, like, is it level 10 is a milestone thing. And so immediately I'm like, okay, Shadow Walk. Wait, but no, a rogue should get Shadow Walk before level 10. Like, I feel like that's even more core to the class, right? And then I'm like, all right, backstab. And I'm like, no, backstab's like, you expect to get it, but it's only class defining because it's what everyone expects. And so I'm like, all right, no. So I went with Toxin Craft. I feel like getting your rogue in the habit of crafting their toxins early on is actually a huge boon, because then as you continue to go, just like the monk unlocks more gates, I'm sure the rogue will unlock more crafts that they're able to do. And so you could start them out with a, basic toxin craft, maybe some damage or something like that. And then they can kind of grow into additional crafts as they keep going.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, I like I like how it integrates sort of like a non-combat thing into it too. Sort of get the rogue player thinking about, maybe from a crafting perspective or maybe from a utility perspective. So I chose a passive skill called Like a Ghost, and it's pretty simple. It just permanently reduces the range at which hostile enemies can attack you. And the reason I chose this one as a level 10 because I think this opens up exploratory options, right? So if enemies can't aggro you at this, if you have a further, zone in which you can get closer, to the mobs before they aggro, I think it opens up opportunities to sneak past them in caves, opportunities to infiltrate camps that maybe you couldn't before. So I just thought it was a nice, simple, you're out there exploring. You've been doing so for 10 levels. Now you can go a little further kind of idea. So
yeah, that would feel really nice too. As a rogue, like you immediately feel like I can do something that others can't. And that's pretty important. I mean, I would have both, honestly. I would have both the level 10.
Yeah, you want them all.
Yep.
Totally.
Yep.
So next up is the Druid. So I'll take this one first. I took a really cool Druid ability, and it seems complicated, but it's called Harness Trait. It says, as a living conduit for the natural world, you're able to harness the traits of natural things through tactile contact. Once harnessed, you may imbue these traits into yourself and others. As you become more experienced, you'll be able to harness the more powerful traits from a wider variety of things. Each druid can have only one kind of trait active on a target at a time. So really the only reason I took this, not the only reason, but the main reason I took it is because it's got expandability. It reminded me of the chakra gates a little bit, right? Like you start off, you can harness a trait of Greybox the raccoon, you can harness Greybox's traits. And then at level 20, you can harness, something else, a more sentient NPC. And then from there, level 30, you can harness, maybe a raid boss, a dungeon boss of some sort. I just think it had that expandability you look for at a level 10. So
yeah.
What about you for the Druid?
I actually chose the same thing. Nice. There we go. A little synchronicity.
Nice. Our first one. Yeah, that we picked the same one.
I also think if the Druids don't already have Herode at level 10, they should get Herode by level 10 as well. Again, because it's an expanding thing. And they should get used to using Herode because it's such a major part of their kit. So assuming they don't get Herode like right off the bat, I would say level 10. And the other thing I got to bring up though, because and this will come up again, but so Wandering Stones is listed as an ability, and I went back and forth between should this just be an innate thing or should it be not? Should it be something that like you actually have to like be an experienced druid for a while? And I lean on like 20 plus for the Wandering Stones because
interesting.
I feel like you're not actually going to make much use of them in the low levels anyway. And
right,
it kind of makes you actually have to play your class. And I really don't like the idea of like port bots. And so I would like people to at least play for a while, actually have to play the game before they can call themselves a port bot. And the other thing about harness trait, because this is going to come up with the ranger as well, is I'm still on the fence of knowing whether or not that means you harness things like whatever, animal you see, because on the page, just like the beacons for the ranger, it lists specific traits. And so it kind of makes me think that harness trait is more just like an ability that's unlocked by using harness trait on a specific mob type. So it's a tough one, but yeah, I think it's like a scaling ability. And so like, that's why I chose it too.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, and of all the classes we're going to talk about, Druid is the hardest one to speculate on because it's the one we've seen the least of. So definitely a sore spot there. You mentioned Rangers, and going back to the YouTube comments, there was a comment from Basilisk121. They were hyped by the Monk video, but they also wanted to know about Rangers in Pantheon, and they said, okay, so awesome. I'm now excited to play the Monk class. Looks badass. Question, is the Ranger, or will a Ranger be a pet class? And please be a thing. So they really like the the pet aspect of a ranger, and I thought we could actually help out quite a bit with this one because we can give our our opinions about the abilities and stuff, and I certainly will, on what the milestone ability should be. But there was actually a quote from Joppa in a dev stream not too long ago that kind of shed some light on this. So I found it, I clipped it, and Joppa was speaking to how rangers will use their skill abilities that relate to pets. He said, rangers will beckon different animals for short durations to execute specific abilities in combat. So I thought that was a really good clarification. And Basilisk, if you're, happen to listen to this, maybe that helps out. I hope so, because it's definitely like, how pets are done in different MMOs is very different sometimes. And it's so basically saying they're not going to be like summoners who just summon pets, right?
Yeah.
Now, here's where we get into the tricky part, because, in the class page and looking at the abilities, when I was going through this, trying to find one that I think would make a good milestone ability, I think the pet stuff is pretty cool, man. And I want it to be good. I chose Kalen's Charge, which says command an animal's trust, immediately ending combat and making the animal friendly towards you for a short time. So, that sounds like you're summoning a pet, but you're summoning it from the environment, from something you're engaged with, or, something
so
that's
like
wandering around.
I see that like as a temporary charm, right?
Yeah, like a temporary charm, but it doesn't really speak to the abilities. I do think it's separate too. And so it's confusing, or it's not 100% clear exactly how it's going to work. And rangers, again, fall into the category, just like the druid. We haven't really seen them. We haven't seen them in action yet.
Well, they've kind of given little tidbits about how like Beckon works here and there, and just never in like a central place. But I'm pretty confident that how it basically works is either you unlock a beckon from a certain animal, or whatever. But I'm pretty sure it's just an ability with a like temp pet aspect to it. Like the grizzly one, I don't think you actually get a usable pet. I think it's just like a grizzly comes and does the thing and then it leaves. So it's more just kind of like an expression of an ability more than anything, as far as I can tell.
Which makes sense. Yeah, when that would make sense, and that would actually be, relatively, from what do I know about programming, but it seems like it would be a relatively simple, straightforward way of doing it. Of course, I have to say here, had tracking been on the new website, I would have taken tracking, because you know me, I need my tracking, but it's not on the website.
Yeah.
Please let it still be a thing. I'm like Basilisk here. I'm like, please let this be a thing, because I need my tracking. So, what about you? What did you think for the ranger abilities?
I kind of was looking at Beckon a little bit as well, for the same reasons as the druid harness trait. But the one I fell on was actually engage and withdraw. Just in case they don't have it already. It's kind of like, I feel like this is something that has to be really early on, because it's such a primary part of how the ranger does combat. That if it's any later than level 10, I would be like, I think it's too late, So yeah, I went engage.
I would have taken those too, but if I was allowed to take two, I would have taken those. But I was working.
We make the rules. I can only take one. Eric, you can take as many as you want. I've got 3 listed. I only told you the one.
Wow. How about all of them? Why not all of them?
Yeah, just all the. For the record, sure. I'm not as far as like front loading of abilities. Like I think the class should be defined, but I don't think you should just give them everything early on and then just get upgrades the rest of your level, because that's boring. But
exactly, but like that's EverQuest 2 style, right?
Well, a little bit, yeah, a little bit for the most part. They got better about it, at least for the first few expansions. But yeah, you get a lot of your primary abilities pretty early on. You're going for the next one, or are you still rangering?
Unless you have something else to add, go for it. If you have something else,
I'm good.
Okay. So the next one is from our buddy Rob Weinzerl. They wanted to talk about the Enchanter class. They said, I wonder what the level 10 ability will be for Enchanters, and then speculated maybe Charm. So I'll let you take this one first.
Oh, this one was so hard.
I know, right? It is.
Especially with the abilities listed on the website, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
So
yes.
I was tossed up because I think Mez is obviously such a primary thing, right? Like,
Yep.
but at the same time, I feel like at level 10, you're probably not going to be doing full group content like primarily. And so that's what it was kind of tough for me, because solo, you're really just using Mez as like a, oh, oops, I messed up kind of a thing. And so my actual answer is actually Rune Skin, because I feel like that is something that's actually more handy in the early levels as you're having to face things toe to toe. And it just to define it, so Rune Skin is basically, it's a damage shield for the enchanter that wears off if you take, considerable damage. And so you would think the enchanter's probably pretty squishy, and so early on they're gonna have a really hard time. So
it would be nice to have that little extra layer of protection for when you are still learning your class and getting a feel for it, and especially playing a caster class when the slightest mistake and mobs on you and you're dead.
Exactly. And so and with the rest of their kit being like, they have so many more group focused things, I was like, okay, then like past level 10 they could start working that stuff in. And then I feel like Charm should actually be level 20. I know everyone's gonna hate that, but like,
no, I agree with you. I think Charm is super powerful, and even though I want my Ranger to have it at level 10, the enchanters have to wait till level 20. So, screw you. I'm just kidding. But I chose Whisper of Tyseer. So this is the mana regen increasing ability for enchanters. It says flood your group with the Whispers of Tyseer, increasing the rate of mana regen. Now, we've seen the enchanter on stream demonstrated a couple times. Tehom did a really good job of it. And when I watched that video and I analyzed it and I made a video about it, the mana regen is just crazy. The way how much it helps, the lack of downtime that it saves. So again, at level 10, you're starting to do more group stuff. You're starting to really get into a point where people are going to be looking for those kind of valuable resources, and I think that could be something that would make it the enchanter a very attractive class to a group. So I'd like to see that at level 10.
Yeah, and honestly that would be an equally good choice, if not better. I agree with you on that one for sure.
Okay, so let's go through the rest of these now. No more YouTube comments, but we'll do these ones. So Dire Lord, I went with Leaden Blood. Oh. So the way that this ability is described is corrupt the blood of an enemy, slowing their movement speed over time until they're rooted to the ground. So I was just seeing this as like, something that can really help with the Dire Lord being the anti-magic tank when they get into those situations where they're put into a spot where they're not fighting mages who are going to want to stay at range. Obviously, if they're forced into a position where they're tanking for a group that's doing a lot of melee combat, it gives them a little bit of a advantage and a reason to be taken as a tank when maybe the warrior would always be the better choice. But I don't know. It was a hard one to decide. What did you think? It
is a hard one, and that's why I have multiples. So no, I think that's a great one, and I love that ability too, because it's like that progressive slow, and then they stop. They're stuck.
Right. Isn't that cool?
But I actually chose one of their blood states, Essence Leech, in particular, because it to define it increases your crit chance, and then it makes when you do crit, it heals you, and I feel like that's just super like class defining and like thematic.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, the ability description, but also just like the play style being that you're a tank and that is your operable like kind of strategy is I'm going to try to hit harder so I can heal more. And then the other thing would just be like, I would assume Provoking Phantoms would be like a really early on one. That's their aggro gain. But I don't know if I would even want them to wait till 10 for that, because I feel like that's another core thing.
And I feel like when they've shown the Dire Lord on stream, I think Joppa talked about it. I think Provoking Phantoms does come pretty early, because it's kind of necessary for the Dire Lord class. What about Paladin? I took one that I feel is probably a little bit too powerful for level 10, but I'll let you see if you made the wrong choice like I did.
I went for one of the edicts, Celestial Authority, which is a stun, and it also puts the mob in a disoriented state. I feel like the edicts seem to be a pretty common theme, and so it just seemed like a good starting point, mainly because they don't have any anti-undead abilities on the website, and being, vengeful paladins and everything. I'm like, I feel like that should be on there, but yeah, I went with one of the edicts instead.
Nice. Okay, I went with Glory and Honor. Oh my gosh,
that was my like. I need it to be level 20 or later because it's too powerful. But I'm sorry.
It's super powerful. Yeah, it's super powerful. It always makes me think of like when I played Hearthstone pretty seriously. You always knew the powerful cards because they had multiple effects on them. It's like it does this and this and this and this. And you're like, oh, okay, that's a good card. But Glory and Honor, what it does, it says it grants an ally a percentage of your total armor class. And while active, the damage you deal in combat is converted into healing for that ally. So that is
so good for off tank. Like paladins seem to be like good. You would totally want a paladin in your group as an off tank, like even in a regular group. Like it just seems so good.
Yeah, totally. Okay, Summoner. Now, another one that's difficult to put our finger on. I took Escape Portal because I like to get out of situations as quickly as possible. They said the way that this ability is described, it says it creates a portal at your target location. While the portal is active, when you activate this ability, again, your group will be transported through the portal to the location it has placed. So this is very utility based ability and hugely useful in a lot of situations.
Useful, yeah.
Yeah, I think it could help with a lot of people who are maybe not used to a game like what Pantheon's aiming for, where you have a way to get back to a save state, I'll call it, right? I'm thinking old school gaming, but like a place where you're safe, where you can, like they talk about these little respite areas in dungeons they want to do. Something like that would be super useful at level 10, I think. But maybe too early.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think that's way too early. I want people to get acclimated to not having an easy escape. Like I want them to feel it early on, and so that when the ability does come up and it starts to, they start to find a group with a summoner and they're like, oh my gosh, you can portal us. Like that's amazing.
I could see somebody taking a summoner just for this ability.
Yeah, like, which is rough.
Just to be able to do this, because you're just going to be wanted in every group, right? So,
which is great because the summoner, a lot of people see him as the solo class. And so it's good that they're given this ability that's so nice to have in a group.
Balance it out.
Yeah, right? So I love the ability. I do think it's a little early for that. And because they are very based on their pet, obviously. We would expect them to get an Archmental before level 10. Like if they don't get an Archmental before level 10, it's like you're basically not your class.
Yeah, what are you doing up to that point? You're doing?
Just like a crappy wizard.
Like a crappy enchanter.
Yeah.
You're like,
that's probably more accurate.
You don't even have the firepower of a wizard. You're just running around looking for, anything that you can smash easily.
Yeah. So for me, before considering they probably have an Archmental already, my choice in ability was summon Archmental armor and weaponry, because it's the natural next step in their progression, right? So they have some experience using the pet and kind of what it's about, and then they hit level 10. Now they can start like adding, they can start building on the pet, and I think that's really class defining.
I like your choice better. I'm going to replace my Escape Portal with your choices. Those are way more logical. Wizard. So what did you take for the wizard? And I know you didn't take what I took here because it would contradict what you said earlier about druids. So what'd you take?
This was a hard one because again, the website needs to be updated. But I'd said familiar, and maybe nice. Flash.
Okay. Yeah. So summon familiar, we know what that does. What's Flash?
Flash is a short range teleport, like oh crap, and you teleport away like a short range. So I think when I think Flash, I'm like, League of Legends. Everyone takes Flash. But I feel like that's pretty useful both in solo and group situations. And it's pretty defining as like you don't want to take damage as a wizard, and so you want your button to poof.
Get you out of there. Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, I took the long range Flash. I took Order of the Gatewalkers, which is basically the wizard port ability, right? Basically, I won't read the whole ability, but it's basically wizard port. Your argument earlier about exploring and learning the world more before you get the ports does kind of impact me now. If I had to re-choose, I probably might think twice about this one, but I do like a good Wizzy port, and I want them to be able to, have that identity in their arsenal. So
Yeah.
that's what I went with. And let's finish up with the Shaman. And I went with Windstrider, which is imbuing an ally with elemental wind, increasing their movement speed. So it's a haste buff.
Yeah.
I think a good haste buff early on is nice. I think that, haste is a pretty powerful mechanic. And I think if you can, give the Shaman a nice, because they're always going to be competing with the healer classes for, healing proficiency and that kind of thing. So I thought giving them a nice haste buff really is a
To
nice
be clear, this is movement
level 10
speed.
ability.
Movement speed, right?
Okay. Oh, you know what? You're right. Why was I thinking it was combat speed? Okay, never mind.
Because
I don't want them to have that then. Because
you might be thinking of
there.
other things.
Okay, well, if they have a haste buff and I didn't get it, then that's the one I would choose.
They might. But I went with boons and banes. I know that's really general, but I know a lot of their like abilities have a boon and bane like aspect to them. So my thought was like, oh, maybe they get those abilities, but they don't really like interact until level 10. So like, you have them, but now you're level 10 and you really unlock these kind of like combos, so to speak. But yeah, that was a tough one because the abilities on there, like I think Windstrider is actually really defining. I think that is pretty, it's Sao, right? Like that's pretty.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say,
defining.
I mean, Sao was defining for a druid back in the EverQuest days, and Rangers later on when they got it. But it's being able to increase movement speed is hugely useful, and people will want it. So
like usual, I would say both. Yeah. But I do think the boons and banes are supposed to be important. So like I feel like that should be a pretty early on thing, level 10 kind of.
Yeah. I could see that. Yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, again, that's Shaman is a class they demonstrated quite a while ago now.
Indeed.
They did a good video demonstration of all their abilities, so you can go back and check that out. But that's our fun class discussion, and we could go on. I can't believe it's been 40 minutes already. We've been talking about this. It goes by.
Why do you guys
so
let us do this?
We're having fun with this. I don't know. I
hope the listeners are having fun too, because this has been a blast.
Totally. Okay, so that's the news. Let's talk about some quick Pantheon Plus notes. So we our No Sleep Till 40 stream, which kicked off this week, was the EverQuest crew led by Drac, taking on the new Vanicky time lock progression server. Not only did they survive sleep deprivation, but they actually
they killed it.
And Desiree, they killed it. They were actually going again today. They got to 40 and then they were back at it today, which is insanity. But Desiree and we were both hanging out in chat for parts of the stream, and it was hopping. They had a huge crowd, and when we were in chat, they had upwards of like 90 people watching. You made a really cool observation that morning. You remember what that was?
Yeah. I guess I posted it to Twitter, right? Because I was kind of excited. For a while, and this is kind of crazy, but Pantheon Plus was the most viewed EverQuest stream on Twitch, period.
It's unbelievable.
Crazy. And it wasn't even just for like a second or anything. It was like most of the morning, right? And it's not like, we got a big burst and everyone left. It was just really consistent all day. It was like at least 70 people, like almost the whole day. Up to like 90 something, like you mentioned, and eventually, another channel kind of came along and passed us up. And I wish I could remember the name. I tried to look it up for our notes here, and I couldn't find them anymore. But yeah, there was another channel that was doing the other server. And so we weren't number one, and then Co started playing. We're not going to keep up with that at all. But in general, it was just, I don't know. It was a really cool stream. I really enjoyed just kind of peeking in as I could yesterday. And honestly, it's just kind of like fun to be a big fish in a small pond, so to speak, for a little bit. And so many new people coming in, just like from, from the EQ crowd. And, we weren't like evangelizing Pantheon or anything, but it's pretty obvious, right? But everyone's just having a good time. So fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Tons of fun. Congrats to Drac. Congrats to everybody on that crew for the show that they put on and the fun that they had doing it, because it can be easy to just, those can get pretty dull, after the fifth or sixth hour, but they kept it going and they were entertaining the whole time. So congrats to Drac and his team there. So that's awesome. In terms of what we've got coming up on the content calendar this week, as you can see, Drac is again back doing EverQuest Monday for his midnight adventures. Tuesday, CryptFox, our pal, is doing EverQuest 2 on the new Varsoon server. That's at noon Eastern on Tuesday. And then at 9 p.m. Eastern, we've got our grading session for MMOs 101. That's where we stream on our Twitch channel. We give out grades. We're grading Project Gorgon this week. Been playing it for 2 months or so now.
Yeah.
And we're going to be handing out some grades. So that's going to be interesting. I've got a lot to say about that game. And I can barely stop myself from talking about it right now because I just want to talk about it, but I won't. Tune in on Tuesday for that. Wednesday, Sparrow's on her Twitch channel streaming Lord of the Rings Online at 9 p.m. Eastern. Thursday, our friend Ben and I has a new fan fiction article coming out called Aminsal's Focus. It's as part of his larger series of that same title. So that comes up 9 a.m. Eastern on the Pantheon.plus website. Friday, our friend Redbeard Flynn has a video all about being the chosen one in an MMO.
It's going to be good,
which is something that
I already can imagine
that's a discussion
where this is going to go.
I know, man. There's going to be costumes. There's going to be role playing involved for sure. So check that out on his YouTube channel. That evening, Sparrow's back streaming again, playing EverQuest on the P99 version of it. And that's the next week of May 30th through to the June 5th on our content calendar, and it's also this week in VR's news and notes. When the Pantheon community speaks, we listen. So let's dig into the forums and fan projects to see what the discussion's all about.
All right, this week I picked something a little different from the forums. It's just something I've kind of really been wanting to highlight, and it's just kind of been on my mind lately. So it's really perfect that this kind of came up, and so this community discussion is coming from user named Benty from the official Pantheon forums, and this thread is titled "I was wrong." So I'm gonna have to condense this. It's a pretty long one, but hopefully I do it some justice. But to give some context, Benty starts by saying they don't really post on the forums much, but they've gone about kind of trying newer games that come to the market lately, and they've had a bit of a change of heart about Pantheon, and that's changed because so a while ago they had shared kind of an opinion about kind of Pantheon's continuous delays, as a lot of people have, and we've heard this opinion a lot with how it's taking too long, and ultimately it's just going to get kind of steamrolled by all these other big new games. It's just going to get completely overshadowed. Right. Yeah.
Right.
And since it's still in development, still going on, some of those games have come out. Like specifically Benty lists Lost Ark and New World, and some that haven't come out yet, like Ashes of Creation. But since they've played some of these potential competitors and seen the direction they've gone and all that, they've kind of changed their tone. Yeah. So most of this post is actually centered around Lost Ark. So if you haven't played that, I'm sorry. I haven't really played it either, so I'm going off of what I've heard and seen from guildies and other people in the community. But yeah, I'm sure you could apply a lot of this to just any modern MMORPG, right? So yeah, hopefully it's
for sure.
Yeah. But so the first thing, there's kind of sections here, and I figure we could really quick touch on each of these. And I didn't grab a lot of replies to this thread because they all kind of go along with it. I think a lot of you guys will resonate with some of this, and so I already know it's a bit of preaching to the choir, which is something I try to avoid usually, but again, it's been on my mind lately, so we're going to talk about it. The first thing that Benty lists was the lack of sense of accomplishment. There's one line that I especially want to pull from the session, and that's where Benty says, "They've made redundancy king and difficulty minimal." Man,
that's a good line.
Punches hard, man.
Yeah, it does. It does. It hits, right? It sort of hits us in the feels where we're, why we're interested in this game at
Yeah,
all.
and I mean the point here is specifically about Lost Ark. Only allowing you to do certain things a set amount of times per day, which kind of like forces you to always do those things, or you feel like you've missed, something. And how this was interesting to me, this kind of sentiment, and that's even getting gear isn't exciting because there's not really difficulty in getting it. It's just time. And they actually go to Benty says it's so tangible, it's unimpressive. Like, do you kind of get what
Yeah.
he's saying there? Because
I, I do. Yeah. I think this is just a good example of like one of the things that we have all these reasons that we get interested in Pantheon, and then, for some people like Benty that lose interest over time or get, lose belief that it can become a reality, is that, and then you get these reminders of these games that come along that are like, oh yeah, right. I remember why this sucks.
yeah.
I remember, here's another example of how this can suck. Like they keep finding new ways to make games with the same problems just manifesting differently in different games,
Yeah.
right? So when you play Lost Ark, and my experience with Lost Ark was not great. I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy it. We did our grading session on it and pointed out all the things I thought were, problematic with it. And yeah, a lot of it is just the same things that I've problems with other games, and like he's talking about the what is it? So tangible, it's unimpressive, and talking about the gear
upgrades.
and that's exactly right. Like it's there. Sometimes it's too, I don't know. I can't say it any better than that, but they're absolutely right. There's no mysticism in it. There's no fantasy in it. It's very grounded in stats and numbers and gear score, and that's
right.
it.
Oh yeah, and I mean the gear score, but I think the main takeaway I got from this was like, you look at gear upgrades as, oh, this is 5 dailies away. Like that feels completely different from like, oh man, if I go into this dungeon with my awesome solid group that I love playing with, and we manage to beat this boss, like I might get this particular item that, is going to last me for like, maybe a month, maybe longer of gameplay, right? And it feels completely different, even though technically you might know where it comes from or something like that. It feels different. You have to go through this whole process to get it. That there's so much mystery in that process. Like a lot of things could happen, right? But when you just know it's just a matter of A plus B equals C, it like takes all that away.
Yeah. No, I mean, the ends, like gear is not the goal.
True.
The experience is the goal, right? We forget about that. We've become, in a lot of ways, just in general, in different areas, focused on what do I get from this? What is the end goal? What do I achieve? And what do I end up with? And people forget that getting to that goal is just as valuable. Like that's what you're not, and people will argue with me and say that's not true, but I can only speak from experience.
I've got like a multi-page rant in my notes. Not today, but just like, because I was just thinking about this. This has been on my mind a lot lately, and yeah, I've got just a ton of just like thoughts I've thrown on paper about that whole process of, why is Pantheon? Why should we approach Pantheon differently? And not just be like, hey, this is a game to be beat. But anyway, we almost really derailed there. Okay, so to get back to the thread, the next big point they list, and I don't want to dwell on this too much, because everyone's gonna have big thoughts on this, but it's about the toxic community that they found, centering specifically around Lost Ark, but and the things they cite are like the Reddit. They noticed that everyone is kind of just bashing each other over their like character setups, and like people just tend to make fun of each other if they don't have like the optimal, like this is what your character should be, this is like your meta, and if you're not doing that, like you're not playing the game right. And just how like, and this one kind of really struck me was how the community is just completely, I shouldn't say community, like literally everyone, I'm sure there's perfectly great people that play Lost Ark. So if you play Lost Ark, I'm not against you, but this attitude I definitely am. And that's being really unfriendly to people that want to just learn mechanics like raids on the spot instead of, and I didn't even realize this was such a major thing for Lost Ark, but apparently because they have like a dungeon or a group finder system that just kind of throws you in, like you're expected to basically study up before you get it to the raid. So you know how to do the raid before you've even done it before. And
the thing is that like it's okay to be competitive. I don't like when Pantheon comes out. You're going to see this kind of stuff on Reddit as well. Like this is not exclusive to Lost Ark. I mean, this is just people being people, and you'd be naive to think that this is not how people are going to behave when Pantheon comes around. And they are. They're going to be making fun of your druid build is stupid, or your ranger you didn't pick the right mastery. You haven't gone after the right mastery choices, and this kind of like whatever. That's fine. It's the idea is that the expendable is the key word here. Like everything with games like Lost Ark and some of the other games that are built for temporary engagement and for quick, get in, get a big, influx of players, drain them of all their money, get their, through microtransactions, all that stuff. And then who cares what they do? Like, we don't really care after that. Yeah. Like that's the problem. And that's where this sort of like, it's okay to be really toxic and be, disrespectful towards other players because you're not going to be connected to them for very long. So who cares?
Right. And that's kind of, in Pantheon, how that plays out is if you have a really toxic guild that is, high and mighty and, supposedly knows how to do everything better than everyone else, and they're, trash talking people and making fun of them, like everyone knows that guild is a bag of it's just like terrible, well, and they have that reputation.
The thing is, there will be counterweight to that, right? There will be guilds that have been forming throughout pre-alpha, alpha, beta. There will be guilds that are, people who are interested in a community-focused game. Not like nobody went into Lost Ark saying, I'm really looking for a community-focused game. Nobody did that, and I can like that. That's not the mentality behind it.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Well, the next point here, and we're seeing this a lot nowadays, but this one is about the excessive use of artificial roadblocks. And Benty says that this is especially bothers them because apparently they're also a designer and programmer and stuff like that. And so they just kind of point out that like just a ton of stuff is just straight up gated by a clock. With like the only purpose of the mechanic is to slow you down and make you spend money, and it's really obvious.
Yeah. Get that crap out.
I mean,
nobody wants
I don't even know. There's not much to talk about on that. I mean, that's just terrible. I mean, right?
That's just the business model, right? That's just the business model coming, doing what it does.
Well, and speaking of that, last point to touch on is the money side, and Benty, recognizes that like games need to make money, right? But they can't stress enough how much they hate how like common free to play or pay to win style, like how it plays out in total, not even just the transactions, but like what it does to the whole ecosystem. And they say it kind of makes anything that you accomplish feel especially meaningless. When even if you don't have to pay for something, because free to play, the fact is that everyone around you could have just like bought their way to the top for the most part. They do the bare minimum to like, but they more or less can buy their way up. And it just kind of diminishes any kind of personal accomplishment that you might have, even if you put in more work. So again, I'm sure a lot of people in the community are kind of on the same page about that. Right. But the reason I bring this kind of preaching to the choir here, because I'm sure all the specific points people are like nodding their head like, oh yeah, that's terrible. And I'm not trying to trash Lost Ark. We've got plenty of people in our community that play Lost Ark. It could probably be a very fun game, I'm sure. But the big point here, and that's like, reflected in the replies to this thread, is that we're seeing new games come and go like throughout Pantheon's development. And we see them kind of sticking to that formula and maybe even like adding to the formula in a bad way. And we kind of just, we see them come and go. I don't know how to explain it. So like, while Pantheon's taken a long time, yeah, like, sure, but at least they're not kind of straying. They're not going to try to follow the formula. They're just sticking to their guns. And I think that my favorite part about this thread is just that this person had the opinion that Pantheon was going to be rendered obsolete, but has come to see that Pantheon is actually like, may as well be a different genre, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Here's my takeaway on this. And this is, I think, really important. And I'm so, impressed with Benty. Somebody who can say I was wrong about something it is somebody that I respect, because if we get into it, if you get into a discussion with me and if there's nothing I can say to you that would cause you to say, wow, okay, yeah, no, I was wrong about that, or vice versa. I go into every discussion with, is there something you could say to me that I would say, yes, I'm wrong. You're right. I'm wrong. Then there's no discussion to be had. More people need to take Benty's approach here and say, look, I made a judgment. I was wrong. I've come around to see that my information or my knowledge has grown, and now I have a different take on it. And now because there's just people have written off and taken Pantheon out of their mindset because they made a snap judgment or because they had a different set of facts to work from. Always keep that fluid. Never lock that in, be variable, be flexible in your opinion of something, because like Benty points out, all these reasons that you see over and over again, you may incorporate new information into your assessment of things. Yeah. So I really respect that.
And honestly, that is a huge reason I pulled this thread, is because I think this is the epitome of how I would like to see people come back to Pantheon. Not necessarily everyone, you all need to say that you were wrong or anything, but just that kind of like mutual respect of, hey, like I had this idea, now I have this idea. And being willing to like publicly say that is awesome. Yeah. Absolutely awesome. And the thread is incredibly positive. And I'm so glad that, we have folks that aren't going to be like, well, you should have known. Like, no one says that. No one's saying that. And so props to you, Benty, for having the stones to to go out and post on the general, forum where everyone's going to see. And have such a nice, even take about things. And I'm glad that you see how Pantheon's different. It's awesome.
Yep. 100%.
And if you'd also kind of add, because there's actually, so the thread is pretty liquid at this point, and there's a lot of really good points in there. So if you want to add to that or kind of check out what people are saying, it's on the official forums. I've, of course, linked it in the show notes if you want to check that out. But that is going to be it for this week's community discussion. The Pantheon community is full of cool projects, new people, and things that are just worth sharing. What's this over here? Look at that. So let's see what we can find in this week's Community Spotlight. All right. This is a really exciting one for me, and I know this is so silly, but we have an introduction.
It's been a while.
It's been so long, and this is really simple. It's titled Greetings. And this is from forum user Thoramir. They say they've been following Pantheon for a while. They're actually, it's kind of cool. They're actually a noob to classic MMOs. They're not like an EQ vet or anything like that. And so I think it's awesome. Well,
Yeah, we need more of those people. We need more people who are interested in classic MMOs but have never played them.
Exactly, because they exist. I promise you all, they exist. But yeah, they're just looking for a game that makes them feel like they're actually on an adventure again, and I think they're in the right place. So
I do too. Welcome, Thoramir. That's great to have you.
And if you'd like to welcome it, I've got the link, of course. But let's get into video stuff. And it's just going to be two things from Bazgrim. First of all, if you missed Pantheon Jeopardy, what are you doing?
Where were you? What were you up to? What excuse could you possibly have had to make?
But just in case you didn't have time or I don't know, maybe a doctor's note or something. BazgrimTV posted the VOD of the whole thing on their YouTube channel, so go check that out. Dude, I think the questions were harder than people were anticipating.
Totally were. They totally were. Although I'm happy to say that my lore questions, a couple of them got answered.
You did so
they
good.
got a couple of them. So I went a little too deep on one of them.
Well, but it was like it was $1,000 one, right? It was.
Yeah, it was the hardest one. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, they were so good.
That was fun though. We had such a good time watching that on his Twitch channel and just chatting it up in chat. We had a really good time.
Yeah. And just a reminder, when you do watch those, a lot of creators from our Pantheon community put their commercials in. Some of them new, some of them old. But if you see them while you're watching the VOD, definitely go check out their individual channels because they're all amazing. And then another Baz video. This one's a follow-up. If you remember last week, he did a gathering summary and kind of like cool video around that. Now we've got the crafting one. And so it's a nice timeline, right? You gather the materials, now you craft with them. So makes sense. Another great video by Bazgrim, obviously. But that's actually going to be it for a nice quick community spotlight.
Mail on a Sunday? That's right. Let's check the mailbox. All right, back to the mailbox we go. We said last week we had a few more questions to tackle, and we've got a couple of them this week. We'll do a quick couple answers to these ones. The first one comes to us from our friend Tech Ninja, and I had a hard time deciding whether to include this one because I really don't have an answer to it. I don't know if you do, Des, but he asks, has any of the Pantheon Plus staff ever played a MUD or a multi-user dungeon style game? What was it, and did you like it? And if not, what didn't you like? So for me personally, I have not played a MUD. I know of them. I know people who have played them and I know what they are. Personally, I've never played one. I mean, the closest I've come to playing a MUD was back in the old like dial-up internet BBS days, like the bulletin board services, and playing like, sort of turn-based 24-hour turn-based type of games. It's a little close, but not really. Have you ever played a MUD, Des?
This was, I think I've mentioned a few times, I didn't have our family didn't have a computer until I was a bit older. And even then, I wasn't really playing games on a computer for a few more years. So I missed this.
It's before your time.
In a way, it is a good bit before my time. So I'm sorry to disappoint Tech Ninja, but
no, it's okay. I'm glad we included his question anyway, because I thought it would be interesting to sort of, just again, give a bit of a reference point for the people that listen to this and are interested in Pantheon, that, MUDs play a really important role in where Pantheon comes from, going back to Brad McQuaid's, early experiences as a gamer. And he talked quite a bit about that in those days and what that was like. And we're all sort of coming from that, foundational groundwork of MMO gaming.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good question. And I'm sure a lot of people in our community have played MUDs and be interested to, check those out or share those.
That's what I was going to say is like, well, how about this? How about you recommend a MUD to us? Because I wouldn't be opposed to playing one if there was a version of them, still around. So feel free to recommend something if and we'll try to take a look at it. Or I will. Yeah, I can't speak for you.
maybe we'll stream it on on MMOs 101. Maybe we'll go way back in the time machine. Can you imagine? Nothing it's never been streamed on Twitch before.
Yeah, you can't even select it as an option. It's just
it's not in the categories. The next question comes from our pal John Wayne. And John said, how would you feel about smaller guild sizes in Pantheon and an alliance system for those small guilds to do big things? Des,
love
you
it.
First.
Absolutely love it. This is my preferred method, is small guilds with an alliance. I mean, you could expound upon this a lot, right? With the actual system, but in general, the small guild, or at least if you have a way to have a a big guild with like small guilds inside of it, or, that's my favorite approach. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I'm going to agree with you 100% there. I like the idea of, segmented guilds, or maybe a large guild family with sub guilds. I think that's a cool idea. And I have never wanted to be a part of a massive guild. I always want to be part of a small to medium guild with people that I know and I can talk to, and people that I feel like, I would come into contact with on a regular basis, rather as opposed to somebody that I'm very disconnected from. So, and I like the idea of guilds working together on a macro level, sort of, from individuals grouping to guilds grouping, I think is a pretty cool, sort of exponential way of scaling that. So
yeah, and it just makes sense. It's like a really natural thing that I think we've fallen into in a lot of different social structures. Like the first thing it makes me think of is like the military kind of way. You got company, you got your platoon, you've got your squad, and you've got like fire teams. And so like it kind of just continues to subdivide, and the lower you get, the closer you get, but it doesn't mean you don't work with the others. It's a way of organization.
Right.
And I think that should be played out in MMORPGs a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. So good questions. So that clears out our mailbox. So if anybody listening has questions they want to ask of us as, community members or anything like that, or our thoughts on Pantheon or any aspect of game development that we're observing just like you are, feel free to drop a question in our Discord. It's in the Rewind Mailbox channel, and we'll get to it at some point. So that's it for the mailbox. Sit back and relax. It's time for the lore you know. All right, world lore and the origins of races and environmental details. These are all very important things and very interesting pieces of the lore puzzle that is Pantheon. But I like to think of these as macro lore. And I think sometimes it's in the individual tales and the personal histories and the character detail where we really find some of the most significant information when we're trying to get a feel for Terminus. So today we're going to embark on one of the 4 signature character tales that J.N. Gerhardt has penned. And much like when I read the bait on the show in this segment, this is going to be a longer story broken up into several parts for the show. And I'm going to try and add a little bit of extra detail here and there with some of the fun sound effects and stuff and, flavor that I did for the bait. But we're going to get started. I'm not going to reveal right here what character we're talking about, but you're going to have to listen and find out as we go along. And so let's get right to it as I read the words of J.N. Gerhardt in this week's lore segment. To start with the phrase, Janus Sova is to set a trap in your mouth, your teeth as the snare and your tongue as the prey. What he is, let alone who he is one of the more lingering mysteries of the modern day. If it could be answered merely by muscle or magic, then Sova would no doubt be just another hired sword that fell upon the lovely path known as the Dark Trades. This is a term given to assassins, bounty hunters, and agents of espionage whose professions are at once legitimate and illegitimate. Dark traders are creatures of shadow and subterfuge, sleeping in the day but never truly able to rest. They would prefer Terminus revolve from night to night, the sky providing a moon to each. Sova is one such trader, a jack of none and master of all 3. Though to understand what makes him unique among his brethren, we must consider a riddle, one that brings these kings of criminality lower than a beggar on the street. There is a saying on Terminus that is common only among the dark traders. Known as the turn, it is a brief but ubiquitous phrase that describes the nature of life on the illicit side of the law. While there are many ways to compose the turn, it usually goes something like this: lie at night, die in light. If you are a dark trade professional, then the turn is a distillation of your life, poetic, full, and brief. For it is said that a dark trader must deceive himself before anyone else will believe him. They must believe they have no weakness, behave as if their wounds will always heal, and they've never considered a day when those lies will die by the light of a greater truth. For a few traders, the turn is a friendly teller of doom, and therefore wise or even necessary to bear in mind. Yet for most, it is the devil's devil, an underwriter of debt they can never repay. For the majority of traders, life is not even so glorious as this. There are many falsehoods surrounding the craft, chief among them that wealth and power are simply there for the taking. Contrary to popular mythos, traders often have short, mad lives, marked by poverty, injury, and early death. Most unfortunate souls who break into the dark trades do so out of desperation or delusion. Gang leaders prey on the impoverished, pressing into service those with overwhelming debts or incurable illness. The middle class is also at risk, squeezed by blackmail or betrayal, perhaps deployed as a hired hand for a single chance to expunge their record before the sun rises on their sins. The military class is perhaps the most successful pool for novice traders, though all too often their experience betrays them and the turn finds them a proper gallows to watch the night fade away. What separates the highest order of dark traders from the swinging feet of their counterparts is not that they deny the sun exists, but rather how well they navigate the inevitable dawn. Despite his shadowy reputation, Sova seems to walk in the very light his contemporaries dread, and thus far the turn has left him alone. Still, there is precious little about the man that is verifiably true, starting with the claim by some that he's not male at all. Even so, the most reputable accounts suggest that he is, and as such, this will not be challenged here or now. His age, stature, and species are similarly up for debate, although he is generally supposed to be human, though perhaps not of Thronefast. While there is no shortage of speculation around Sova, one attribute that remains consistent in nearly all accounts are his eyes. Round, deep set, and the color of amber that has been dipped in smoke. An owl's eyes. The reader should not be surprised that even this noteworthy but innocuous feature is associated with a legend all its own. And that is the lore you know. Janice
my
Sova
gosh.
is a great character.
Oh,
don't you
this has
think?
got to be like one of my favorites, man. I mean, I love the bait and all that, but like the whole time going through the bait, I'm like, oh man, when's Janice Sova gonna show up? Because like this guy is an enigma, and like it's so cool.
He is an enigma. That is a perfect description of him, and I think that that would be a good tag, good moniker for him should he ever choose to take that. But yeah, I love this story and I can't wait to keep reading it. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. And that brings us to the end of episode 103. I want to say thank you again so much to everyone for hanging out with us today. Thank you, Des, for all you do, my friend. Yeah, like we said every week, all the content we discussed is linked in the video description or the show notes, depending on how you're getting this podcast. And remember, we value feedback and we want to make the show as best we can. So leave a comment, like, subscribe if you haven't already, all that good stuff. But with that, I'll leave it there and say cheers and thanks for listening.
Bye by night, die in light.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. Pantheon Plus is not affiliated with Visionary Realms. Be sure to check out our Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube channels under the name Pantheon Plus. You can follow Theric at Pantheon Theric on Twitter, and Desrin at DesrinDoes also on Twitter. And you can stay up to date with all things Pantheon at www.pantheon.plus. Until next time, cheers, and thanks for listening.